Hello, advertising students. This is chapter 18, the last chapter for this semester. Yay! We're going to go through some information that you can definitely apply to your paper. It is kind of a summation of everything that we talked about this semester. But what they start off with is the company Tom's, as you all know them as a sneaker and shoe company, and they sell shoes with a sole. So selling shoes with a sole, this case provides key lessons of those concerned with creating and promoting a business. So talking about social impact, a lot of companies are today for sure, and Tom's is way ahead of their time with what they do for the world in giving back. I'm not sure what they're doing currently, though, in the marketplace, so that might be something we might want to look into. So what is social impact of brand communication? Okay, so with a huge potential to make a significant impact on society, brand communicators shoulder the responsibility for choosing what products and ideas to advertise, what messages they communicate, and how they want to communicate them. At its core, effective brand communication is about building brand integrity. We talked about this in the last chapter, and that trustworthy reputation of the brand. Communicators want the recipients of their message to feel positive about the brand. However, this must not come at the expense of doing what is right, both ethically and legally. So we know there's a lot of companies out there today that are doing loan forgiveness, giving free shipping, deferring payments, things like that, which are real positives to see in our community, what some of the brands are doing, not to mention the fact that they're changing some of their core model competencies and changing them up completely, and being pretty flexible with that. What are the key debates about social impact of marketing communication? Marketing communication, particularly advertising, draws some criticism for its social impact. Advertising is a positive force in our society and our economy, even though it can be used in ways that may generate concern. Public relations also plays a major role in the brand's demonstration of social responsibility. Here is an example of advertising as a positive societal force. A lot of companies have information out there about slowing the spread of the virus, telling us to stay at home and stay in place and staying safe, and making sure that we're all connected and that we're all in this together. So these are the kinds of positive messages that are going out now from companies. The key debates about social impact of marketing communication. We talked about this at the very beginning of the semester. So we're kind of revisiting this as we close out the chapters. Can advertising create demand? Some critics charge that advertising causes demand creation. This results when an external message drives people to feel a need or want, sometimes unnecessarily. Companies often conduct significant research to find out what consumers want before they launch new products. Audiences, of course, can refuse to buy products they don't need to buy and purchase, but advertisers are definitely thought of as some type of way of kind of feeding on our insecurities. About things like maybe white strips by Crest, or dandruff, or deodorant. Things like this kind of feed on our insecurities of what we look like or feel like, and advertising creates a demand for that. So I think this is an interesting example. Many years ago, in 1919, a deodorant ad targeted to women because everyone assumed that women would be more likely users of the product. The launch ad was so offended many readers, about 200 people canceled their subscription to this newspaper. However, sales for deodorant rose 112%. Did advertising make women buy something they didn't even know they needed? Was that a bad thing? So it's more about creating an awareness and that this is a problem. And hey, look, we have the solution. It's the messaging behind it that can be sometimes misleading. Does advertising mirror social values or shape them? That's a $1 million question. Critics say that advertising can abuse its influence on vulnerable groups, such as children and teenagers. Critics say that advertising can create social trends, dictating how people think and act. So think about that. Does advertising cause people to be too materialistic? Some argue that consumer culture in Western world is overly commercialized and too materialistic. We talk about this in my consumer behavior class. Critics argue that advertising heightens expectations. What do you think? We've been studying advertising all semester long, looking at your favorite ads, and if you're on in my online class, you did a lot of field exercises about different classes and how advertisers represent the middle class and the upper class by using certain types of pictures and products. So let's go back. Are we too materialistic, and does advertising lend itself to that? So these are kind of the debates that that are out there about advertising and the bad rap that it gets. Should some audiences be protected from advertising? Marketing to youth is controversial because children are seen as vulnerable. Okay, children are not of a certain age are not capable of making their own decisions about products. Their brains are not formed completely, but advertising sometimes is, gets in their head, and they actually want to purchase things that are brand names, not necessarily cereal, but they specifically know the brand of Captain Crunch peanut butter, for instance, because of advertising. Selling soft drinks and candy and food and high fat and sugar contents to children is an issue. Childhood obesity, diabetes, type 2 diabetes is up. So is this related back to advertising? Marketing products like the Juul to teens is also a big controversy. Different flavors that are definitely for children. Bubblegum flavors and raspberry ice and all these kinds of things that clearly would be something a child would be interested in. So they there is some big debate around the social impact of this type of advertising. Does brand communication fairly and accurately portray people? For instance, diversity and stereotypes. A stereotype is a representation of a cultural group that emphasizes a trait or a group of traits that may or may not communicate an accurate representation of a group. Now, we talked a lot about this in my consumer behavior class, but how that translates over to advertising is, are men, here's the example, men are not equal caregivers as women, men are more athletic than women. So I think it's kind of turning. I think there's more equality now. I know that in a couple of my classes, we talked about stereotypes in ads and how negative that can be, and how that's turning around by reflecting society, whether it be it be bringing, they call it dadvertising, or showing a woman in a stronger position, whether it be professionally or athletically. I know a lot of companies are doing that. There are same-sex marriages, including that, diversity of a variety of ethnic groups in ads. So it's getting better, and I think it will continue to get better, but there is definitely some issues with some companies that are not aware of that. Okay, cultural differences in global advertising. So we've talked about this during the semester of how companies, things get lost in translation. Advertisers may overlay their worldview on that of another culture without thinking about the impact of the message. So homogenization of cultural differences is referred to as marketing imperialism or cultural imperialism. Euro Disney found this out the hard way many years ago when they didn't take into consideration the cultural differences when they brought Disney to Europe, and it was a big fail until they, took a look at why and how they didn't consider where they were going. They just took the Americana version and plopped it in the middle of Europe, and that absolutely doesn't work. Okay, sex appeal and body image in advertising. It portrays women or men as sex objects in considering and considered in demeaning or sexist roles. Playing on consumers' insecurities, this is what I was talking about before, can lead to dangerous practices. Responsible advertisers now use models of normal sizes and weight to reduce pressure on young people. Kudos to those companies. Aerie is a great example of a company that does not bring very thin women. They just bring everyday women. They don't doctor up their ad campaign with Photoshop. Okay, it's the real women in the pictures, and that absolutely represents our society. I still think we have a long way to go in this area of sex appeal and body image with advertising. Poor taste and offensive advertising. Viewer reaction may be affected by sensitivity to the product category, such as erectile dysfunction, medication, the time of day that you put certain shows on. A lot of them tend to be at night if they have certain types of advertising for products that are for adults. Whether the viewer is alone or with others is a consideration. So if your kids are in the car and there's an ad on the radio, you're taking them to school, or if something comes on the television during a show you're watching, the context of the ad can also be considered offensive. So something informative or humorous. So it seems that, children are being exposed to things way earlier these days than they ever have been. We try to protect them as much as possible, but there's still some issues out there with the way people react to ads. Some people are a little more, closed-minded, and others are a little more open to, what's really going on in our society when it comes to viewing certain topics in advertising. Okay, creating guidelines is difficult because good taste varies. What I think is tasteful might not be tasteful to you. Okay, sometimes messages are just offensive no matter in what context they appear, and what is considered offensive does change over time. So obviously, for instance, that advertisement for deodorant for women back in 1919 was very offensive. But now, so much goes these days, very different in the way of our thinking. And of course, different cultures look at it differently as well. Is communication honest and transparent? Well, yeah. Communicators need to understand what is not acceptable so they can avoid unethical or illegal behavior. In the drive to catch our attention and motivate us as advertisers to respond, sometimes the truth is stretched a little bit. False advertising is a type of misleading advertising, and it's simply a message that is untrue. So, making claims about things, showing someone that, clearly is someone with not a lot of wrinkles anyway and uses a particular wrinkle cream. Of course they look good. they're using younger women in these ads that, but they're selling this product maybe to 40 and 50-year-olds, but they're using a 20-year-old model. So there's a lot that's misleading in advertising, and we're going to get to some examples coming up. Misleading claims are called puffery. Okay, think of like something that's puffed up that's not for real. Consumers sometimes have been targets of unfair, deceptive, and fraudulent practices in the marketplace. Examples are misleading claims such as in weight loss advertising or burying hidden costs when you're purchasing something like maybe a cell phone package or something with cable. They say one price, but then they say, oh, what we didn't tell you was, it would cost this much for installation and taxes and delivery, and that's very misleading. The Federal Trade Commission is a government regulatory body that helps regulate unfair practices. So there's a lot of government regulation out there that we're going to talk about in just a moment that protects us as consumers. You may not be aware of them, but after this chapter you will be. There's a lot in place that protects us, thank God, from companies that are basically trying to swindle us and give us misinformation. So let's get back to the word puffery. Is advertising or sales representations which praise the item to be sold with subjective opinions, superlatives, or exaggerations, vaguely and generally stating no specific facts. So here's a picture of Smirnoff vodka, and it says the world's most liked vodka. So, and they have a little Facebook icon there. Is it? Who knows? Who has this information? You cannot be making claims that it's the world's best coffee, like in the movie Elf. You have to have some information to back that up. So there's a lot of puffery going on in advertising that is unethical. Okay, here's another example of comparative advertising. Okay, a lot of like wireless, Verizon and AT&T do this a lot in their advertising. And it's perfectly legitimate to compare a marketer's product favorably against a competitor's. However, regulations govern the use of comparative advertising if it can be challenged as misleading. Research in support of competitive claims must be impeccable. So everything has to be equal. And before you create an ad like this, there's a lot of research that goes into it so you don't get yourself into some hot water, as they say. Logos help competitors stand out from the rest. So here's an example of, these are the people we're relying on these days for sure. We're missing an Amazon truck up here, but sometimes a company distinguishes itself from its competition visually or with a slogan. For example, the FedEx slogan, when it's absolutely positively has to be there overnight, was created to set it apart from UPS and the US Postal Service. These vehicles display the competitors' distinctive logos. And we all know these logos and have seen them more recently than not. Okay, endorsements and demonstrations, they're okay. This is something that's positive in advertising. A popular strategy is to use a spokesperson who endorses a brand. I was just watching, oh gosh, it's not Weight Watchers, but it's not Atkins. What the heck is it? Another weight loss product that Marie Osmond, if you even know who she is the spokesperson for. I'll think of it in a second. So an endorsement or testimonial is an advertising message that the consumers believe reflects the opinions, beliefs, or experiences of an individual, a group, or an institution. So that means that this product is being used by this, maybe a celebrity or not. So it has to be believable. It has to connect. That's why influencers are so popular, especially micro-influencers, because a lot of times they're not getting paid in the way that like a celebrity would if they're promoting a beauty product or maybe a hair color. and you know, it's much more credible. Blogola is a word that refers to a company reps posing as consumers or paying bloggers to post endorsements as customer reviews. That is a big no-no. But a lot of times, companies are, you know, they want to boost their sales and they want to boost their reviews, and they get people that are representatives of the company to write a positive review. And that is a big no-no in the business. Okay, here's an example. Weatherproof uses a public image to sell jackets. Okay. Weatherproof, an apparel company, stirred up a lot of controversy with its Times Square billboard showing President Obama wearing what looked to be one of its jackets. Well, clearly it is one of the jackets, or they wouldn't have put him on there. Do you see harm in this? A leader in style, weatherproof since 1948. What do you think about this ad? Okay, what are the key debates and issues about brand communication? Native advertising and branded content. Okay, so native advertising looks like it's news. Typically, you're going to see something like this in a magazine. It features, it could have a feature story, it could be entertainment, and other items surround this type of advertising. An ethical problem arises if you as a consumer can't tell the difference between advertising and the content. Okay, you're reading along and you think it's just information about a product, and then you're reading about, you know, it's what another word for it is called an advertorial. And it's an editorial and advertising kind of mashed together. The FTC says a promotional message shouldn't mislead the audience to believe that it's anything other than an ad. So at the top of the page in a magazine, you'll see something very small that will say advertorial on the top of it. Very small, nothing bold, nothing big, but it's how they get away with it. This happens a lot in magazines. I recently saw one and would have loved to have brought it in for you. And I think I have it right here in front of my face. Let's see. Oh, let me see which one it was under. And I really did want to show it to you guys. And yeah, so for instance, I'm looking at something right now. It says real small at the top, advertisement, but it's in Travel and Leisure magazine, and they're talking about the Biltmore, a timeless retreat. Now on the right side of the page, there is an actual ad for the Biltmore. It's a beautiful ad showing this majestic resort, gives you information. It's in Asheville, North Carolina. The headline is Experience Biltmore like a guest of the Vanderbilts. And yeah, I want to go. But on the left-hand side, you look over and you're like, oh, look, they have all kinds of different things here about, you know, the gardens there and exhibitions and wine. And then you look at the top of the page and you're like, oh, it's an advertisement. So you kind of get sucked in a little bit to some of these. But again, I see them a lot in more in print than anything else. Okay. Fake news. We all know about this. God knows. Hoaxes, propaganda, disinformation. They're not hard to find these days. The FTC has the authority to stop these deceptive practices. This started up a lot in the 2016 presidential election, stirring up controversy. And critics claim that inaccurate and misleading stories disseminated on social media swayed voters' choices. This is a serious matter. It certainly is serious with what we're dealing with now as in globally with this virus. We want the real information out there. Controversial products. Before an agency can create an ad for a client, it must consider the nature of the client company, its mission and marketing objectives, its reputation and competition, most importantly, its product line. Can the agency and its staff members honestly promote the products being advertised? So imagine you as the ad agency taking on a client that you didn't believe in, or they had a controversial product that may not have been completely tested, say, by the Food and Drug Administration, and you're going to help promote this product. I don't know. Something ethical to think about. So unhealthy and dangerous products, more. Going back to social responsibility as a company. Fast food producers such as McDonald's and Wendy's have been accused of worsening the nation's obesity problem. Okay, if you notice now, when you go to a fast food restaurant, you will see a calorie count up on the menu board. They give you options now, like kale salad, or an option instead of getting fries to get apple slices. So they had a lot of work ahead of them of what they could do to kind of counteract this opportunity to that was out there that was negative about what they were doing to our society. Tobacco is another huge one. Advertising, like the Juul, is one of the most heated advertising issues in recent years. And the ethics of advertising liquor is also another major concern. So obviously, flavored drinks that are more attractive to a younger generation is not helping, being that you have to be 21 or older, but that has been a problem for a long time as well. Everybody's aware of it now, so that's the good thing, is now that we're aware of it, companies can do something about it, and as consumers, we can feel like we can do something as well. Here's a great example of how they're taking icons such as Ronald McDonald and making him a little more slimmer, a little more active to convey the importance of healthier choices. And then there on the left, you see someone eating a Big Mac, but hey, Ronald's looking good on that surfboard. So a lot of companies are showing maybe not the overweight version of their icon. And this is just an example of that. Okay, prescription drugs. Since 1997, the amount of prescription drug advertising has skyrocketed. Some doctors claim that they are being pressured to write prescriptions inappropriately due to drug ad claims. Some lawmakers believe that pharmaceutical industry ads contribute to the high cost of health care. Now, a lot of these pharmaceutical companies, they are basically advertising to us about a problem that it doesn't even exist, but they've created it. Oh, look, if you feel this way, guess what? There's a drug for it. Go ask your doctor about it. So it's like now we're going in with more information and asking our doctor to prescribe us. So it's really a backward industry as far as I'm concerned, and there's a new drug coming out every day, it seems. Here's a great video that I have. You want to cut and paste this into your browser and check out. It's kind of like making fun of a montage of distracted people during these drug commercials, showing the side effects are the worst. They talk very fast when they're talking about the side effects of these drugs as well. Yeah, a little scary. So take a look at that. It's funny, but it's true. Communicators' ethical responsibilities. Okay, so first of all, what are ethics? They are the shoulds and the oughts of behavior. It's the right thing to do. Okay? Defining what is the right can be also challenging, though. What one person says is right isn't always what other people believe is appropriate. Morals are the framework for the right actions and are more in the domain of religion and philosophy. So you might say someone has high morals or low morals, but a moral system provides a framework for our behavior of what's appropriate and what we will or will not do as a society. Ethical decisions are usually complex and involve navigating a moral maze of conflicting forces, And we need to be aware of industry standards as well as ethical questions that underlie the core issues. So within every industry, and marketing, advertising, public relations included, there is a industry standards that you need to abide by. More important is that personal judgment and moral reasoning rest on an intuitive sense of right or wrong. So this is called a professional codes of ethics. So many professions write a code of ethics to help guide practitioners toward ethical behavior. Otherwise, people will run amok. Okay, codes of ethics can be helpful to guide your actions. However, they are broad statements and are not intended to explain what you should do in every single circumstance. There's not a rule around every little thing that you're going to do professionally. So in the next couple of slides, this is the Institute for Advertising Ethics, Principles and Practices. So for instance, Principle 1, advertising, public relations, marketing communications, news, and editorial all share a common objective of truth and high ethical standards in serving the public. Number 2, advertising, public relations, and all marketing communications professionals have an obligation to exercise the highest personal ethics in the creation and dissemination of commercial information to consumers. And on and on. You can look through these different principles that we have here. And then this is a professional statement as well for public relations. So they talk about being advocates, being honest, expertise, independence, loyalty, and fairness in your writing and your professional practices. Good to know that this information is available. I think, especially as some of you are getting ready to enter this world of professionalism, graduating May and August. Why and how is brand communication regulated? Okay, thank God we have regulation out there. Okay, so this is what this chart looks like. Okay, we have the government here that has laws about trademarks and copyrights. We're going to go through this in just a minute. There's the First Amendment, the freedom of speech. There's different regulation groups like the FTC, the FCC, the Food and Drug Administration, and others. Then so that's the government. And then your own industry, like the advertising industry, has their own regulations. And then you drop down to advertising practices and audience protection. You have, on our side as the consumer, we have things like the Better Business Bureau or consumer groups that advocates that help protect us as consumers. So here's some key advertising legislation kind of helping us along the way in the legal environment. So there's the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 that protects us against mislabeled food and drug products. The FTC is unfair methods of competition. The Wheeler-Lee Amendment is part of the FTC, but it was amended, and for unfair competition in order to protect consumers and competition. Before it was just about competition, but this Wheeler-Lee Amendment protects us as consumers. The Lanham Act prohibits trademark infringement and false advertising. The Magnum Moss warranty is part of the FTC Improvement Act. The FTC, Federal Trade Commission, constantly was being improved, and this particular improvement was around warranties on consumer products. And then in 1980, there was another Improvement Act for the FTC. These last two you may be familiar with. A little bit closer to your age, Telemarketing and Consumer Fraud Act and Abuse Protection Act of 1994, restricting the hours of the day of unsolicited calls. And then that later turned into, in 2003, a do not call registry, which you can get on a list of individuals who have requested not to be contacted for solicitation. So some of these kind of were born out of another act. So again, all of this legal environment is here to help us out as consumers. Okay, let's talk about what more about the legal environment, trademarks and copyrights. Okay, so a trademark is a registered trademark here on the left for McDonald's, that little circle. Okay, and then you might see over here is trademark for Starbucks, the TM. Now you'll notice this on packaging. Take a look at what they have for FitCrunch. But a trademark is a word, phrase, symbol, or design that identifies and distinguishes the source of the goods of one party from those of another. Okay, so these cannot be infringed upon or copied. Registering through the trademark office provides exclusive use as long as it's for a specific product. Okay, then there's also uniform resource locators or internet domain names. You might know this as must be registered to be protected when you're trying to get a domain name. A lot of times companies want to protect all the names, so they kind of buy out anything that's similar to their name. A copyright looks like this symbol here, and this gives an organization exclusive rights to use or reproduce an ad or package design for a period of time. Copyright infringement occurs when a product is used in an ad without proper permission, including copycat ads. And the Library of Congress controls the copyright protection. Okay, so let's get into international laws and regulations. Okay, a number of countries have enacted bans on certain types of tobacco and advertising. If we're looking abroad, legal and regulatory restrictions vary by country. So some countries ban ads for certain products, like the tobacco or advertising. Contests, promotions, and direct mail are illegal in some countries. So again, when looking at the global picture of taking your product into a different country, you need to be aware that certain things cannot be advertised and cannot be part of your promotional grouping, okay, or IMC strategy. Okay, so the FTC regulates deceptive, misleading advertising and focuses on unfairness, deception, and violations. They oversee advertising involving things like weight loss products, telemarketing, children, and the elderly, which are continuously being preyed upon by companies. I think there's a lot of that going on now by some companies as well, because we're all in that fear and uncertainty stage. And that's why things like the Federal Trade Commission are in place to protect us as consumers. So then we have the Food and Drug Administration. This is a regulatory division of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. They oversee things like packaging, labeling, ingredient listings, and advertising for food and drugs. Okay, determines the safety and purity of foods and cosmetics. The FDA also acts as a watchdog for drug advertising. So again, we need the Federal Drug Administration because there's a lot of companies that are trying to play on our fears and use wording when it's not appropriate. For instance, using the word like homemade or all natural ingredients or the word local. All of those things have to be proven. And they have parameters around them. And things like local, for instance, what does local mean? Does it mean it's 5 miles away from the store that we're getting local produce? Does local mean the state of Florida? Does local mean, you know, the southern states? So that's something that has to be determined. And that's where the FDA comes in for an example, like natural, or all natural, local, homemade, things like that, because they can be deceptive. The FCC is for regulating radio and TV. They can issue or revoke a license. They can ban deceptive messages or those that are in poor taste. They work closely with the Federal Trade Commission to eliminate false and deceptive advertising. So they're hard at work all the time. Other regulatory bodies are the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, regulating deception in advertising and establishing labeling requirements for the liquor industry. U.S. Postal Service regulates direct mail and magazine advertising, including obscenities, lotteries, fraud. And the state's Attorney General Office regulates advertising at the state level. FTC and children's advertising. So the Children's Advertising Review Unit, CARU, evaluates ads for children under 12. As I mentioned before, companies prey on these young minds, and a lot of different practices have been put into place. So in 1990, the Children's Television Advertising Practice placed ceilings on ads during TV programs. In 1996, all stations must air 3 hours per week of educational programming. So maybe ads are not shown during children's programming as well. Or if they are, they have to be very structured and not promoting things like childhood obesity. Regulating deception. Deceptive advertising misleads the consumer by making false claims, failing to fully disclose important facts, or both. So current FTC policy contains 3 elements: misleading, reasonableness, and injurious. So misleading is a representation, the omission, or practice. Reasonableness, reasonable consumer, and injurious must cause material injury. So and it could be by the omission of certain facts that may lead to an injury. Regulation substantiation, okay? Claim substantiation. Advertisers should have a reasonable basis if they're going to make a claim about something. Performance or run the risk of an FTC investigation. So they need to make sure they do all of their homework, as they say. So if, for instance, FitCrunch is claiming to help with weight loss, or other claims that they have that I can't think of right now. So you have to, if you're claiming that, you have to have some backup to that, okay? So you need to have some scholarly work, some sort of doctor, or certain claims that a doctor has researched for you. So this can be a problem. I'm going to show you some examples of that coming up. Factors are things like the type and specificity, I can't say it, of a claim being made, a specific claim being made, the type of product, the possible consequences, the degree of reliance, types and accessibility of evidence, and what substantiation is reasonable. So if you're going to make a claim, you have to substantiate it with some other source that backs it up and says it's for real. Okay, we know that weight loss is a big one, for instance, Slim Fast. The disclaimer in the Slim Fast ad indicates the conditions under which the consumer can snack and lose weight. In case you cannot read the fine print, it says, very low here, okay, we see now you can snack the weight off. Slim Fast, introducing new chocolate pretzel snack bites. So basically, what are you saying here? Okay, it says clinically proven over here with the seal. Okay, and then there's this little writing. We call that like mouse prints. Okay, individual results may vary based on the Slim Fast plan, a reduced calorie diet, regular exercise, and plenty of fluids. Check with your doctor if you're nursing, pregnant, under 18, or following a doctor-prescribed diet. So all that is very small, okay? But they have to put their claims on there because they're saying that I'm going to lose weight if I eat these delicious chocolate pretzels. In fact, I'm not. You have to mix it in with exercise, okay? A reduced calorie diet altogether. And then plenty of fluids, which is basically water. Okay. This is the type of stuff we're talking about here. Remedies for deception and unfair advertising. There are things like a cease and desist order, a process similar to a court trial precedes the order. There's corrective advertising, where an advertiser runs a message correcting the false impressions. Okay, so I said think Peloton bikes here. So Peloton had, we know, this campaign that everybody was thinking bad about it. Now there wasn't false advertising per se, but a false impression, not connecting with the audience. So they pulled those ads, put in new ads, and sometimes companies come out and they correct themselves, like they do an ad saying that they're sorry. Doesn't happen a lot, but I've seen it. And then there's consumer redress, cancel or reform contracts, refund money, return property, pay for damages, or public notification. This is all remedies for deceptive and unfair advertising. So here's a question for you. Can the ad agency be held liable along with an advertiser? The answer is yes. When the agency is an active participant in preparing the ad and knows it is false or deceptive, they too are guilty. We talked about that before. Rethink who you want to represent as your client. Okay, self-regulation. Responsible advertisers take the initiative and establish individual ethical standards that anticipate complaints. Self-discipline, organizations develop and use their own norms. Major advertisers and agencies utilize in-house procedures, and several U.S. companies have their own codes of behavior and criteria acceptable. This is called like self-regulation of a company, the do's and don'ts of being moral and representing your client and not misrepresenting them. So here's an example. We were talking about, sorry, my dog was having a little bit of a fit in the background, so I'm back. Okay, so industry self-regulation. So we talked about regulation in the advertising industry, and this is an example of different regulatory councils that are out there: National Advertising Division, National Advertising Review Board, Advertising Self-Regulatory Council. But I wanted to share this ad with you that got pulled. It was for Special K, and you see here there's a pregnant woman swimming, and it said made with folic acid feeding development. And then they have hashtag powering you. And this got pulled because they had no real science behind how this is helping the pregnant mother with her development and child's development. So again, this was risky to put information out there. A lot of companies might put something out there like heart healthy, good for your heart. I know, for instance, Quaker Oatmeal does that, and Cheerios has been doing that. So they all have to have some kind of science behind that to prove those claims. So this gives you an example of if a consumer or group submitting a complaint about an ad, what the process is that they have to go through. And it says here, the ultimate power of NAD and NARB is the threat of passing the claim to the Federal Trade Commission. Usually cases are settled before that point. So there's an appeal at the top and it goes straight down, and it either gets rejected or accepted. And then they refer it to, government agencies, or they reverse a decision. So there is something in place in this business so that we have the right information out that is not going to harm us as consumers or mislead us is more important. Okay, self-regulation by public and community groups. So there are local groups and local businesses with advice concerning the legal aspects of advertising. There's consumer activist groups that monitor advertising practices for children and the public and the environment. There's a lot of different activist groups out there. For one really big one is for animals and testing animals and using them appropriately, whether it be in entertainment. and making sure there's no abuse to animals. That's a consumer group, for instance. So this is the end of the slides. So we wrap it up with Tom's, which we started off with. So Tom's founder, Blake Mycoskie, works to improve lives through innovation and an entrepreneurial spirit. They gave more than 60 million pairs of shoes away since 2006 when they started doing this. Tom's Eyewear also launched in 2011, and that helps restore sight of more than 400,000 people in 13 countries. They also have other departments. Tom's Roasting Company has provided 335,000 weeks of safe water in 6 countries to support sustainable water. And so Mycoskie basically believes that his company is demonstrating how to do well by doing good, by giving back. Almost every company has something that they're doing philanthropically for their community, something nationally, something regionally, and certainly today in the world we're living in, everything's changed, and certain companies are absolutely stepping up to a challenge, doing something different, helping out, and not just being self-serving, but serving others. So with that, I'm going to end this chapter 18 and say, take this information, apply it to your project, and of course to your quiz number 4, which I am changing the date for, by the way. I'm pushing it back to being due, I believe, on the 17th. So look for that in your announcements. Stay safe, everybody, and hang in there.